What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Movie Emporium's TV review of Westworld Season 4, Episode 5, Zhuangzi. This episode is directed by Craig William Macneill. So, as we're aware, the last episode of Westworld was a pretty huge episode, probably the best of the series, to be fairly honest. It was an episode that actually progressed the story into new interesting territories with the idea of Charlotte taking over the idea of taking over the population of the human race and how she is now able to control it through that, machine that makes those noises and stuff like that. And it was a pretty big deal. And on top of that, we learned that, of course, Caleb is now 23 years in the future. He is now dead. This is like his 200th iteration. Everything about it, we find out, Bernard is looking for the weapon, which happens to be Maeve. It was a lot of stuff going on. It was very, very huge. And so when it comes to an episode that comes after those major revelations type of episodes, it's usually kind of a little lesser of an episode, a little down when it comes to grade wise and stuff like that. And that's what I was worrying about episode 5. I'm worried about the second half being kind of a little bit lesser than what we got in the first half, which tends to happen in these types of high concept sci-fi series and stuff like that. And so this episode has an interesting thing behind it with title, Zhuangzi, which of course is the famous philosopher, the Chinese philosopher. He was an individual that was very potent with the evolutions of society and human culture and the ideas of truth and sadness and lightness and darkness and stuff like that. So he's very influential, very much influences Darwin and stuff like that. And so this episode is dealing with a lot of that. There is not really a lot of characters in this episode, but what it's trying to do and trying to explain is something that a lot of TV shows tend to miss. And you see this in season 2 and 3 of Westworld, where the ideas and concepts are there, but they're not fully realized. And I think having an episode like this really helps. Even though there's only 8 episodes, it really does get a good sense of, where this world is, how Charlotte is controlling it, and how the overarching story narrative is playing out, as we learn from, of course, Christina and Teddy and stuff like that. But also you can see that this is very Matrix inspired when it comes to the control of the population, the control of how things are moving and how the world works, how this is very much like a reverse flipped Westworld in a lot of respects. And you see it through, William and Charlotte and stuff like that. And you see how, Christina's character plays out as we learn at the end of the episode. But there's not a lot of what I would call story arcs in this episode. It mainly focuses on Charlotte and William. It also focuses on Teddy and Christina, and then has some of the rebel stuff with Jay and of course Stubbs. But like I said, I'll kind of break it up to make it easier. And what I'll do is the Christina Teddy stuff I think is actually the most important when it comes to the progression of the story, but the Charlotte Williams stuff is the stuff that we're confused about. I guess you could say it allowed the writers, Lisa Joy and the other writer who worked on this, basically have given us an opportunity to kind of understand what this world is. And basically we see it from the very beginning, where Charlotte is in the middle of a street and there's a bunch of people walking around, and there's a pianist there sitting there. His fingers are raw because of the control nature. We hear, of course, the humming noise that is coming from the tower and the little devices that are around the city that look like light post lamps and stuff like that. And she uses that as a form of people being allowed to dance and people having, kind of controlling, because she's bored of this world. She's created this world to have a specific purpose, and it's kind of boring her. It's like when you see the bad guy finally destroy the good guy and he gets bored, he's like, what do I do now? That's kind of like what's happening to Charlotte's character. She's just finding no joy out of this society anymore. And the reason for that is we see in the beginning of this episode, which is 10 minutes before the actual, it's a cold open, but it's 10 minutes long. We learn William's sitting at a table with a young couple of sorts. It's starting to be brought out about how this couple, it feels like they're under control, but William is really under control, and these people are actually under the control of William and Charlotte and the whole system that is being played out. And what's really interesting is Clementine comes in the mix, and William is basically taken away, but the whole conversation about who is actually control, who is part of the evolutionary species at this point, is very interestingly brought up, but they are left to their devices before William goes off to talk to a host who is of course named Hope, and Hope has gone on kind of a murder rampage to play this game, which we haven't learned until later on in the episode what that game is. But as William and Clementine are walking into the building, we see a bunch of dead people. We see, of course, the world is actually frozen in time because they can control the human population and stuff like that. And they walk up and Hope is there, and Hope is like angry, and she's talking to somebody and stuff like that. And then in the process of everything, William makes her understand that she's not really in control. She's there to fulfill a purpose, and that she needs to go back and because she is what they're trying to transcend, I guess you could say, into. I think it's the thing that we see with Bernard, and I think the third episode, if I remember right. But we start to see like there's some real problems going on in this world that has been created, of course, through Charlotte's meandering and stuff like that. It leads back to the moment where he goes back and he talks to the couple, and then he goes and talks to Charlotte, and the whole idea is being brought up about the fact of how she is bored of this world, how Hope was the one who killed the homeless guy that we learned about earlier, who was actually basically found the tower is protected by the devices. Like if you think about the Matrix in a lot of ways, where people are, because they're under control, the things that they refuse to see, or the things that they're not allowed to see, sometimes there's, as Charlotte says, there's leakage, and people start to see, and they become outliers, and people are of course hunted, which we'll talk about in a second. And what is really interesting about this whole concept is she questions William's ability to, because there's another outlier, she questions William's ability to do the thing he needs to do, because she feels like he is a constant failure in the whole idea of the concept of what the hosts are able to do, how they're now the dominant species and stuff like that. And the whole idea of like Hope, questioning kind of, should she kill this guy, the homeless guy and stuff like that, just kind of having a conversation with him. It leads into some programming problems, which is what, if you think about life in general and society, the conformity that is the basis of the story, the control, is always going to have problems. It's like I said, go back to the Matrix, the idea of people wanting to not be part of the system, being part of control. It's really an interesting kind of concept that they're dealing with in this fourth season, where it's always been about society controlling what they can't control, and they do everything in their power. It's like Michael Crichton's other book, Jurassic Park, where the species, the dinosaurs, are let loose, or they escape because man can't control the biological nature of everything. And that's what's happening here. Charlotte thinks she can control everything, but as we see, things are not happening. We actually get a chance to go into the tower, which once again is this big white tower that nobody can see because they're under control. We see Hope, who is now dead. She has committed suicide, and once again we see big display, which is actually in the form of that maze that was always the big thing in the first season. And we learn about this outlier of this woman who is kind of now seeing the tower, and she needs to be eradicated because they need to work out the kinks and the bugs in the system. And of course William says he's gonna go after her, but Charlotte, of course, being Charlotte, she questions everything, and she of course questions whether William is going to do what he needs to do. And I find that interesting that Charlotte really is doing exactly the same problems like Anthony Hopkins' character did in the first season, or even William did in the first season, where the level of control, the level of of how you are in command and stuff like that will never be perfect. And as far as she wants to transcend, she wants to move past this world, but she can't seem to do that because it always seems to be a problem. But they're basically, William is tasked to take down and eradicate this kind of this problem, this outlier, in a lot of respects. And on top of that, we learn about the game, and the game is basically, if there's an outlier, if there's someone that's kind of opens their eyes in a lot of respects, they are hunted down by hosts who are now in command to take down and kind of eradicate the situation. And we learn that of all the hosts that have done this situation, the outliers, there's been 37 hosts that have had the same problem that Hope has, and we see that William is having the same issue as well. And I thought that was a really interesting thing, because once again, the control system never is perfect, and it is perfectly shown in this episode. But of course William goes after the outlier, and that brings in the Rebels arc, the Jay and Stubbs characters, the ones from the desert. They're going after the outlier as well. That's the kind of smaller arc. And as we see, they move through the city. They've done this before. They know about the tower and the weapon and stuff like that. And they basically need to get this outlier out before the whole situation. That's why they're in the desert, because they know they can't be controlled by this powerful entity machine. And so in the process of everything, they go through the city. William actually spots them, actually turns on the ability for the as we've seen with Charlotte and earlier, they are able to use like a phone to control, the human population. So the humans are basically, if you think about Kingsman in a lot of ways with that whole control system that they were making, that's what this is fully realized, to be fairly honest, because the human population, of course, attacks Dub and Jay. Jay is able to go and after the outlier, and of course we see William on the roof. He approaches the outlier. He questions. He actually stops before he's going to shoot her. Actually asks her. She thinks that he is a human, so she's like, can you see it? Can you see the tower? I'm guessing the way she talks about her husband who killed himself, it's the husband of either the accountant, the homeless guy, or the Paul who committed suicide. So I'm thinking that there's some kind of thing there where it's going to link into who she is and what she is. Maybe not like to an important sense, but you get the sense that she was either married to the accountant or of course Paul, who committed suicide. But of course William is getting ready to shoot her and kill her, and of course Jay helps her and saves her, and they that's where their arc leads. They are able to escape the city off on the futuristic boat that you see in every movie when it comes to sci-fi technology. But the reason I left the Christina stuff kind of at the end, even though it's a small portion of this entire episode, is what it entails, what it involves, and the kind of implications about what this season is doing. And it doesn't really start out anything different. She wakes up, she's happy, she talked to Teddy. I think she feels like she found kind of a connection, but there's something off about Teddy. Maya, who I finally figured out, Ariana Debose's name in this series is of course Maya, and we have a discussion between the two of them. There's once again this discussion of her nightmare, how she feels like she's in the real world, which is kind of funny when she doesn't realize she's not actually in the real world. But she of course goes to Olympiad, which we know is controlled by Charlotte's character now, and she has a discussion with her boss because she starts telling the story about Dolores, as we know is Dolores and her father from season 1, which I like that story about. She has enough memories of kind of enclosed in her whatever mind that she is basically reliving or retelling the story of her life on Westworld, and I thought that was kind of interesting. But her boss says he always does questions it. She of course tells the story. She's trying to convince him of the story, and then of course she gets a call from Teddy, who asked to meet her to make an excuse, kind of like what Neo and Morpheus did in the Matrix. And of course she goes and meets Teddy. Now once again, they are aping the Matrix a little bit. It is a little problematic in a scenario, but Westworld's always been a story, like I said, about control and about, the ideologies of, human and what it is like to be human, and, the world of your surroundings, whether, is fake or real. Do you want to live in that world? Do you not want to? Like, the idea of God, playing God, is very much played into this episode, as it's actually stated from Teddy and, of course, Christina's character. But they meet, and of course Teddy is trying to do open your eyes scenario, the take the blue pill, the red pill scenario, and he basically asks her on the dock whether she sees it, and where of course we recognize that he's trying to get her to see the tower. And he brings up the whole Paul scenario, he brings up the whole situation of Olympiad and the idea of control and the idea of playing God. He even says she's playing, she is God and stuff like that. And she at first, she doesn't see it because you need a story to run through the entire episode. But as her story plays out and he kind of is trying to open her eyes, she says she has to meet an old friend who, he's like, follow the schedule, don't trust anybody. But of course the old friend is Charlotte. At first it feels like it's just a meeting, they're getting together, but there's more to it. I think if my theory and concept is correct, Charlotte is using Christina to control this world and to shape it as what she sees fit. So she's trying to keep everything under control. Charlotte, as you can see in her face, is not trusting of what Christina's telling her. She says something about meeting a guy, and Charlotte's trying to get the information out, and of course she won't do it. But Charlotte's like, oh, I have ways of doing it, which is very menacing, which I'm surprised Christina didn't catch up on that. But Christina's trying to keep her emotions in check. Well, in the essence of everything that we see, Christina goes back to Olympiad, and she goes and she starts checking the world around her, like the different stories she's written. And we of course see the accountant, which we of course, as we learned in the episode, is the homeless guy. But it leads her boss, which is Emmett, to confront her and bring her into the office. And the thing that happens earlier in this episode that I actually forgot to mention was Teddy was like, he brings her to this couple sitting in a chair, and he's like, like, you can change the scenario of who they are. All you have to do is close your eyes, think of it, and it will happen. At first it doesn't happen, and all of a sudden she sees it starts happening, and then she changes it again. She realizes that Teddy might be onto something, that there's something there, which I found interesting, that whole idea of control. So when she goes back to Olympiad and she starts talking to the boss is like being real forceful with her. Then she does something that is really interesting where she is able to control Emmett. And so she tells Emmett some commands to go back home. He's been working too long. He asks her. He says something about a walled garden. She asks what the walled garden is, which is a closed circuit situation. And she asks, "Where is this at?" And he says, "Everywhere," which makes sense. You think of all the machines that are everywhere and how everybody's, under this weird guise, I guess you could say. It leads her to realize there's a door sitting there that she enters, and she sees that map that we of course see with Charlotte. But it's revealed basically that everybody in this world has had a story put into place. And who is that person that has created those stories? Now, she's looking for information on Charlotte Hale. She's looking for more information on Dolores Abernathy. She's, of course, restricted. We've basically come to the assumption that this world is basically under the guise of a host, like Charlotte, but Christina is the one controlling it. And she actually goes and meets Teddy later on that night as she's walking home. And basically what it's revealed is Christina is basically mapping and controlling this world with not only her logic and thoughts and brain and all that stuff, but she is basically writing the system. This is a world that she has created in the world that she is producing. What that means for implications on like Charlotte and William, because William confronts his like real self and asks about, what is my place in this world? And William's like, maybe you need to find that place. Maybe you need to confront and destroy Charlotte, basically is what he's implicating. It makes me wonder like where they're heading in the next three episodes, where you wonder about that control. You wonder if Charlotte really is under control or she's under the guise of Dolores, who's always been kind of the Neo in a lot of respects. Maeve has those Neo-like abilities, but she's always been the one that has had like the interesting kind of character arc where she had the way where she became kind of like an antagonist, and when she kind of dies at the end of the third season and comes back in the fourth season, her kind of writing and storytelling and the way she's under control of possibly Charlotte, who's probably afraid of her, really starts to unfold upon itself. And we learn, as Teddy says, you're a god, or she even says that she's a god, and that is basically what the story is. It's about this world that has fallen, and Charlotte is now controlled. The world that is, what she was hoping for to be perfect is not perfect, as we know about control and systems and ideas of human psychology and human emotion, and how even understanding the brain from a host or an android or a computer's point of view is never going to be perfect, because there's always going to be that problem. And Christina's character is being used in that system. She is controlling people, and people are starting to come true. People are coming to light. They're starting to see everything, and it becomes basically kind of, what is Christina's next move? What is she going to do? How is she going to open her eyes to Dolores? She finally sees the tower. It's all about opening your eyes to a system that controls you in a lot of aspects and a lot of reasons and doubts and stuff like that. And it's also taking on the idea of like being used in a way that is manipulative and stuff like that. So there is a lot of stuff, like I said, that is very vocal in what it's trying to do when it comes to today's society, especially in the real world of our world. And now it is a really good episode, but unlike the last episode, it doesn't do what I call mind-blowing stuff. It just helps accentuate what happened with the last episode, what exactly the system is and how it works. So therefore, it is actually a really impactful episode with trying to tell the story. And what I really like about what's happening is the narrative is actually fully realized, and doesn't feel like there's unjustification for what it's trying to do. It actually has a purpose. It has a setup. It has the kind of the moment when it peaks and when it starts going down to finally conclude its season. But everything feels justified. Everything feels in place. It doesn't insult your intelligence. It actually helps you along to deal with the narrative of how confusing Westworld can get when it comes to sci-fi and its ideologies and it's very heady material that it's dealing with. So it really did work. This felt like a really important episode that is pretty surprising for something that came after something so shocking and amazing. So I really give them a lot of credit. They really did work on this episode to caress it and to the needed out to really get the story that they're working on. Once again, you still have a little bit of worry that it's not going to conclude very well, but if it continues on the trajectory and they keep doing what they're doing, I think it's going to be a winning season. I think it's really going to show that they finally kind of figured it out, and I hope in the 5th season they continue the road they're going on, because it really does do a really nice justice on the season and series that is Westworld, which hasn't been great since season 1, to be fairly honest. But with that said, it is a great episode. It has some great moments. It has some great interesting concepts and ideas. It actually answers some things that are really confusing about what the season was doing, and I think it does in a really justifiable way. So with that said, I really enjoyed this episode, Zhuangzi. Very much an episode that is very important to Westworld, and I'm going to give it 9.5 out of 10. I think it's definitely a winner. So anyways, with that said, that is going to be my take. 9.5 out of 10 for Westworld Season 4, Episode 5, which is called Zhuangzi. Thank you so much for watching. Comments below, as always. What did you think of this episode? Do you think it worked? Do you think there's stuff that is still confusing? Like I said, there's still stuff they need to leave till the end of the season, but I think it's continuing on a great trajectory. So 9.5 out of 10, but let me know in the comments below what you think. But otherwise, if you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at the top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome. Hit that like button, and we'll see you guys on the next episode of Westworld. Peace out.